Hello, everybody. Welcome to our RetireAdvisers Podcast. We've got a great agenda here today. We're excited to go through everything in detail. Starting off, my name is Zach. I'm the CEO here at Pension Consultants, and I have Michaela. Michaela,
yes.
What do you do here?
I am the RetireAdvisers Manager.
Super duper. So we've got a ton of good stuff to go through today. I think this is going to be a really helpful episode for a lot of people because right now it's a kind of, it's a tumultuous time. So we're going to cover what's going on in the world, go through a few different reports and articles. And then at the tail end, we'll go through one of our latest articles from our website talking about retirement distribution strategies. And so I think we'll round it off with a nice, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be
nice little bow.
Pragmatic. I don't know. There's some word out there I was searching for, but that's what we're going with today. So, what do you think? It's a pretty tumultuous time. Do you think a lot of people are nervous or worried out there?
Oh, absolutely. For a lot of different reasons, and specifically, what's going on with the markets. It's a wild day today.
I'm curious from your all's team. Have you guys gotten many? I know things are really bad when you start getting calls from participants saying, move it to cash.
Right.
And usually that's the timing of those sorts of decisions are not very good. But has your team gotten a lot of those types of calls?
We haven't, which has been very surprising after today. Possibly. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. I feel like because the market has been up and down a lot this year, I think people understand that it's a little bit of a ride, but we will see.
Yeah, for sure. Just for anybody watching this, it takes a little while for these sorts of things to go through the whole compliance machine and everything like that. So today is March 27th. So give a little context for anybody listening. But currently, the S&P is now down 6.9% year to date with the market not quite closed for the day, but does seem to be looking like things are kind of starting to head that direction. But 6.9% is a pretty small downturn in the grand scheme of kind of where we've been over the past couple of years. But good to know that participants are not overly worried or anxious about it. But it is interesting that usually that decision to go in and sell everything, that's usually like the point at which you've called the bottom. It obviously doesn't quite work like that mechanically, but usually I think when people are finally at the point where I'm so worried about this, we need to go and do something drastic. That's often the point where it's like, okay, you're the last person that's sold out of this market,
right.
And time the bottom well. So I don't know, is that your intuition as well?
Oh, absolutely. And what I try to say to people is don't act on what you feel or what you think. It's what you know. And so really doing your research and seeing, what information's out there to give us indication of how long this is going to last. And with that, do you think it's going to last a while? I know it's kind of unknown with everything that's going on, but
right.
Is there a safe place to hide?
Well, it's always, you should have the right, you should go into this sort of stuff already having the right strategic allocation, where your portfolio is set up so that should something bad happen, you're in a good spot, and no matter how long this goes on for, and right now it hasn't gone on for all that long.
Right.
There's you get to the other side of it at some point. And so even if you're retired, a portion of your portfolio needs to be defensive and there to fund withdrawals, over the next several months, several years. But there's also a portion of your portfolio that's invested for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so as long as you have the right balance of that kind of stuff from the get-go,
right.
Usually the right thing to do in a position like this is don't touch it. Don't make any big drastic changes. Think about think about not just what the next 3 or 6 months might look like, but 1, 3, 5 years.
So you build your portfolio for the different markets that we will ultimately face, right? It goes up and it goes down, and
right,
it'll go back up if history tells us anything.
Like tech stocks are down quite a bit this year. I have to look up the exact number, but so your tech heavy NASDAQ type stocks are going to be down quite a bit. So if you were a retiree that was invested heavily in those types of companies, you're having a really bad time. But you shouldn't have done that. You should have had a nice balanced portfolio of fixed income, a little cash in there, a little bit of tech, a little bit of, more defensive value type companies, a little bit of international, that's the whole ensemble there is supposed to be working for you. And, having worked with individuals personally and going through, periods like this, based on the number of calls I get from people worried, that usually tells me if people were in the right stuff to begin with, because right now I'm not getting a lot of calls,
right.
Clients in general. If you were invested more conservatively, your portfolio's not down, that 6 or 7% that I was talking about.
Right.
So yeah, it's the most important thing is to really be prepared for should this kind of stuff happen. And as long as you've got that right mix, as long as you've got the right kind of long-term allocation for your portfolio, you don't need to worry about it too much.
Perfect. That makes sense. And I think we talk about too time horizon, how soon do you need to access funds? And if you're close, hopefully your portfolio is a little bit more conservative and super aggressive with those tech funds.
Right. Yeah, I think if you were to just play worst case scenario, and we'll probably get into a lot more of this stuff as we go on, but from an economic perspective, just with the situation in Iran, there's the emotional component of this is scary. Then there's the economic component of, well, I don't want to go in and just sell stuff out of my portfolio because I'm scared and I'm worried. During times like this, there'll be people doing that. What you need to think through from an investment perspective is what's actually going to drive up or down cash flows of those investments. Because fundamentally for investors, you're just taking cash flows, you're discounting them back to present value. You're getting a value, here's what this thing is worth. And so if stocks sell off more than they should, then it's because investors are overly worried and they're not thinking through the economic ramifications of everything. So, but I think the most legitimate part of the whole situation is oil and energy prices are higher. That's expensive. Energy finds its way of flowing through most of the economy because you've got just the raw gas and oil that consumers and businesses purchase. But as you work from the bottom of the supply chain all the way up to the top, those costs compound and flow through all the way to the consumer and to businesses that are buying goods and services. So that's the kind of core argument. However, one thing to think about through this is that the U.S., and none of this is in any of our stuff that we're going to cover, but the U.S. is in a very different spot economically going through this situation than it was in the 70s and 80s when we went through, kind of the past supply shocks and energy shocks. Just the portion of the overall U.S. economy that is made up of energy and energy-related goods and services is way lower today. And if you also think about consumers, and this would be something to think about for your own situation, how much exposure do you personally just on I'm going to have to spend more money as a result of this? How much exposure do you have to that? Some, right? It's not nothing. Like you're going to go buy gas and it's going to be more expensive. Mm-hmm. But, if you even think about, I was just before this, I was speaking with one of our investment analysts, and gas right now is, here in Missouri, what is it, do you think? Some people, we may
I would say
upset.
like 3 something.
Yeah, we'll probably upset some people by saying that. It's pretty cheap, pretty
Right.
reasonable. But yeah, 3 something.
Right.
I mean, I can remember, I don't know, back in the year 2000, 2005, like gas was roughly about that then.
Right.
In the meantime, what's happened over the past 20 years? You've had wages double, maybe triple. So people are making a lot more money now on a nominal basis than they were back then. And cars are a lot more efficient as well on a mile per gallon basis. So it's not the same, gas going up to $3 or $4 a gallon 20 years ago, and even 40 or 50 years ago. That was a bad thing, because that was a big chunk of your budget. And you're going to have to, I need to go make some big cuts somewhere else in order to finance that. Today, U.S. consumers in a much better spot. Cars are a lot more efficient. You can go buy an electric car. You may even be able to sidestep this problem altogether. So I think the U.S. economy is going to be a lot more adaptive to this kind of thing. And I don't think it necessarily means oil's $110, $112 a barrel.
Right.
Therefore, we're screwed.
I think that's very interesting what you're saying. For 2 pieces, like I will say, I feel like most of the rhetoric that we hear is that wages have been stagnant. So I will say that's a little different from my own understanding. But you are right about, I was reading an article and it was the CEO of United, the airlines. And he said, oh, yeah, I feel so bad. Our tickets are more expensive now because of gas. But they have not seen a dip in people booking flights.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they said they're really strong. And so I think you are right. I think we are in a better position to deal with the increase of gas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just funny. There's truth to that.
Right.
You wouldn't think so.
Right.
It's kind of counterintuitive, but you're right.
And the big thing that gets missed through a lot of this stuff is that as somebody that tries to model out some of this, okay, what is going to be the impact on inflation? What is going to be the impact on asset prices as a result of it? Just take oil for what it is. Set aside the whole war situation, just oil and increased energy prices. The thing you can never model is the changes in consumer behavior as a result of that. And, the tariffs, like we went through this with the tariffs, and, that was, there's something about Q1, Q2 of each year that, the Trump administration says now's the time to do something crazy. But we had the tariff situation, and it was nowhere near as bad as what the people were concerned about at the time. And a big reason for that is behaviors change. That people don't just say, oh, the cost of this thing is going up 20%. Darn.
Right.
They change their behavior. And some people, depending on what they're buying and selling, they may be forced to operate within that new regime. But I think the choices that businesses and consumers have now versus in the past, and the way they can manage and navigate this is likely to not be anywhere near as extreme as people are currently worried about. This could very well be famous last words, and then we'll just go in and delete this episode. But tying it to one of our articles that we had, I have a report from the OECD, and they put out once a quarter their economic, let me see what they call it, the economic outlook report. And so they released an interim report just given what's going on in global markets. And one of the things that they have on here is projections for global growth, as well as projections for global inflation. And across the board, they've brought global growth estimates down as a result of higher energy prices.
Right.
The idea being, I've increased my my energy costs. I don't know about you, but if times are tough, you're going to cut out everything except for your house payment and your utility bill. Everything else you're like, I can just ignore that.
Right.
If you need to cut something out, you're going to save those for the last. So that has an impact of driving growth lower. There's kind of demand destruction that happens as a result of that. So that's the OECD has kind of modeled that into their projections. And then they've brought inflation up. So lower growth and higher inflation. I've tried to kind of work my way into their numbers a little bit. They're projecting for the U.S. in 2026, 4.2% inflation in the United States. And 4.0, well, I guess that's G20. They may not have the world on here, but 4.2% inflation for 2026. That sounds pretty bad.
Yeah, doesn't sound great.
It doesn't sound great. But I personally think it'll be a little bit lower than that. Again, based on consumers are going to ultimately be more adaptive to a lot of these changes and just have more choices available to them. So I don't know. Am I sounding optimistic?
I'm getting a little bit of both.
I have a natural tendency to kind of lean against whatever the present moment is a little bit, but things could definitely get a lot worse before they get better. I mean, there's nothing. I don't know if I'd say the two kind of worst case. I'd say in general, look past this. It's okay. We'll get to the other side of this. There are two things that could happen that would be pretty negative. That would I'd have to update my thinking a little bit. One would be ground invasion in Iran, and that very well, who knows, $150 a barrel oil prices, maybe more. I mean, that would be calamitous, and depending on the nature of the situation, could be better or worse than that. The other thing to be concerned about too is if we've got midterms coming up.
Yes.
And with midterms coming up, you've got this political desire to do something about this. What's a bad idea you can think of for how to combat inflation?
Lower interest rates.
And that's a pretty good answer. Yeah, I mean, like, just give people more money,
right?
Which I think politically makes a lot of sense, right? Like,
right.
Just give them more money. You've got inflation; things are expensive. How do you deal with things that are expensive? You give people more money. So I would say if the inflation problem could get really bad if, on the federal side of the government, they're like, well, we need to just like start writing COVID check kind of thing,
right, yeah.
or lowering interest rates really aggressively into this. So that could totally be fuel in the fire. So those are my two like potential worst case scenarios where, if either one of those happen, ignore everything else I just said. But other than that, I think we'll get to the other side of this. Oil is not going to be $100+ a barrel forever. Who knows, even this weekend, something could be released to say deal was reached, everybody's happy and, shaking hands and friends again. Or it could get even worse and, people could be more negative. But so that was my very long monologue on everything going on in the world from my perspective. What thoughts or what riffs do you have on that whole situation?
I honestly, you brought up the U.S. dollar. Do you feel like there's a lot going against the U.S. dollar? Because I don't think it's just this. I think it's also we are quite a bit in debt. One way to get rid of that debt is to print more money. Do you think that the U.S. dollar is going to hold up in the long term?
Love the question. The narrative, like last year, was one kind kind of very much against U.S. exceptionalism. And you had an inflation problem in the United States, and you didn't have an inflation problem elsewhere. And so the dollar performed really poorly. It was down close to 10% last year, relative to other currencies. The weird thing this year is the dollar's actually, I'd have to look and see what it is up, but it is up this year. And it's up a decent amount. Because, whereas last year, the U.S. had a inflation problem relative to other economies. Well, this year, the inflation problem looks a little bit better, at least from my perspective, in the United States relative to other economies. Mm. If you've got to import a lot of your energy into your country because you don't produce it locally, you've got an energy problem. The United States is energy independent. We export slightly more energy than we produce. And I think for that reason, we're a lot less exposed to this situation. And because of that, likely to have a better inflation situation in the U.S. than outside. And so currencies in general are going to trade based on differentials in inflation expectations and differentials in interest rate expectations as well. And so last year it was kind of flipped against the U.S. and this year I think it's flipping back a little bit. Who's to say what the next 3, 6, 9 months look like? But at least so far this year, that's kind of been the story. So another good example of like diversify, have a portfolio that's got exposure to a lot of different stuff, different currencies, different economies, because you really never know how things are going to change. All right. Well, I kind of covered some of the stuff I wanted to talk about. Do you want to touch on anything from your end?
Yeah. I had this fun article that I read, why the U.S. Treasury market is like a rom-com. And basically what it's saying is the U.S. is like the guy in the beginning of a rom-com. Tall, handsome, has a lot of money, but isn't perfect. And maybe not right for you. And most people right now, we're at the beginning of that movie. This is what this article is saying. We're at the beginning of this movie, but there could be a time where we meet someone else, and they might have a better option than U.S. Treasuries. What's your take on that? You're an analyst, so what's your take on that?
Well, I can't comment on the rom-com side of things because I haven't seen enough. Well, I think I saw this. I think there's a guy named Joe Weisenthal at Bloomberg, and he put out this tweet that I thought was just hilarious, that nobody else would find hilarious. And he said, "Does anybody know any good Substack articles about the downfall of the U.S. U.S. exceptionalism or something to that effect?" And the joke was every Substack article is about the downfall of U.S. exceptionalism. I think everybody has an intuition that like it can't go on forever.
Right.
Like we've all read and heard of past empires, and they've all collapsed or made way for some other great power to step into the role. Meanwhile, the U.S. has a big debt problem.
Right.
In fact, I can't remember if it was this article. I think it was this article that was talking about like the least dirty shirt.
Yes. Yes, it is this article.
And so, on the U.S. has a debt problem, but the U.S. also has the least dirty shirt, meaning that it's not. It's a dirty shirt, but it's not as bad as everybody else comparatively, at least in the developed economies. So that helps out the U.S. situation a little bit. But yeah, I think we all have some intuition that like 110% debt to GDP is not good. It's not sustainable. We haven't had a debt that's that high since going back to like World War II, which, by the way, wars are extremely expensive. So that's something to keep an eye out for. if the U.S. really can't afford to get involved in a really big way without taking on a lot more debt, and that would have obvious dollar and treasury market implications.
Do you think that is the biggest concern for the U.S. is debt?
Biggest concern. It's a big concern. If you're a fixed income investor, it's a good thing to keep an eye on. Is the debt situation, and is there demand for the debt? I mean, that's really your big risk.
Right.
Is if you issue all of this debt, is there enough demand to finance that debt? I have good news there as well. There's tools where you can go and you can see the way they do these treasury markets is a whole bunch of people say, I'd like to buy some treasuries. And they go, the Treasury Department, and I'm oversimplifying this and somewhat butchering it, but the Treasury market says, well, I'm only going to sell this many Treasury bills. It's all I need. And you've got a bunch of people that are saying, well, I want to buy some. And it's called a Dutch market, Dutch auction, I think. And so I believe everybody gets some portion of what they were asking for, but they may not get all of what they're asking for. But the cool thing is that you can look at the data and you can say, well, how many more buyers showed up than there were sellers? And it's like 2 to 3 times more buyers than sellers.
Oh, okay.
So, you can just kind of keep a good close eye on that. And okay, when that number approaches something closer to like 1 for 1, maybe we have a problem. But at present moment, there's 2 or 3 times as many people that want to buy our debt, even with everything going on in the world,
right,
that want to buy our debt. And again, I think we'd have to look at the data, but I wouldn't be shocked if this whole situation has actually strengthened the argument for treasuries as opposed to weakened it.
Oh, really? I like that. That is good. It's really good if you're close to retirement and you are a little bit more conservative with fixed income, especially knowing also that the dollar is strong. So that's good.
Right. And I'll just continue to riff on just a bunch of random bond-related things. You've hit on my special interest here. But the big thing from a fixed income investor's perspective, what you should be worried about. Forget the debt situation. The U.S. has a printing press. They can pay you back. So as an investor, your concern is not, I'm going to lend the government $1,000 and I'm not going to get my $1,000 back.
Right.
You get your $1,000 back. The big concern is how much interest rate exposure do I have? And then maybe a little more nuanced, what kind of like cost of living exposure do I have? Because if I buy a bond that's 30 years out and I say, well, that's a good deal because I think inflation is going to be 2 or 3%, and inflation ends up being 5 or 6,
right?
You got smoked on that bond purchase. But what you can do as an investor is you can raise and lower your exposure to that based on the term of the bond. So if you're really, really worried about inflation, you're really, really worried about this debt situation, and this debt situation may lead to higher interest rates, and that's bad for bonds.
Right.
Well, you could buy shorter maturity bonds that just don't have as much exposure to that. Because you're going to buy it, you're going to get your money back in a year or 2, 3 years, and who cares what happens in between now and then, because I'm going to get my money back pretty soon. Right. So that's, I think, a lot of the nuance that retirees are missing sometimes with thinking about portfolios and thinking about how to invest money in retirement. Is there's a lot of levers you can pull to either provide exposure to certain risks with the idea of earning some extra return, or dialing the exposure down, and you can turn off your exposure, to a large degree. You can turn off your exposure to that certain risk. And this idea, bringing it back at the beginning, people calling up and saying, move everything to cash, I'm panicking.
Right.
Is it wrong way to think about it? What exposures at this point in your life should you have, what risk should you have exposure to? And what risk should you not have exposure to, or not very much of? And as long as you've got all those levers in your portfolio, and as long as you've got them dialed in right, you can sleep through the night through this kind of stuff. Who cares? You'll be all right. I think we're kind of getting to a little more of the application side of things. So maybe we just jump on through to the building a retirement distribution plan. I've done a ton of talking, Michaela. You have a ton of experience working with individuals that are at this point in their life. When you think about building a retirement distribution plan, if we just ignore even the article for a moment, what sorts of things how do you think about that problem? What's the first couple of steps in order to start wrapping your head around building that plan?
Right. I think, you obviously need to know how much you need to take out, right? You need to do some budgeting, some planning. And then you also want to make sure that you know all the types of accounts you have, right? You have tax deferred, you have Roth dollars. And then you would want to utilize something like an income needs analysis, something that we have, to see if you're on track to spend a certain amount of money throughout retirement. Those are those steps that I would take when I'm first thinking about what kind of distribution plan that I wanted to work with.
When you've worked with people that are trying to kind of create that for themselves, what sorts of things, what kind of surprises people about the process and the situation? Like, this is a point where people are, I think, stressed, worried, maybe confused on the details. What are some of those aha moments with people to, say, oh, okay, that's, I didn't think about it like that before, or, you've brought some clarity to the situation.
Yeah, I think it's just really doing a breakdown of income that's coming in. So looking at Social Security, looking at pension, looking at your 401k or whatever retirement plan that you may have, and then the expected expenses. And I think just kind of breaking it down brings some clarity. And another concern that I hear a lot is, is this going to last me through retirement? And that's when it really kind of becomes important to determine what strategy you want to utilize. I'm sure we're going to talk about the 4% rule in a moment. But I think that's the major concern in doing something like that income needs analysis, or if you're working with an advisor, they may have some type of software where they can really kind of gauge how long your account is going to last based off of how much you're taking out.
Mm-hmm. I think that mental shift from putting money in to no longer putting money in to now actually taking money out.
Right.
For some people, that is just an impossible hurdle to get over. It's just like, it almost feels wrong.
Right.
It's like, if you've chosen some habit for your entire life, and then you're just like, never mind, I'm going to do the exact opposite now.
Yeah, it's scary for sure.
I don't know. I can't think of an analogy. It's almost like I've decided my whole life to not smoke. And then I'm 65, and you know what? I'm just going to start smoking.
Okay. I'll try to ride that ride with
you. But that's the kind of, there's almost this like, I'm breaking some rules I set for myself kind of thing.
There's some truth to that for sure.
But that's where running the numbers is really the key for that. Mm-hmm. Run the numbers, use the software. How much money do you need? What can you safely withdraw from your accounts that's sustainable? What other income sources are you going to receive in retirement? And do all those numbers, offset each other, basically?
Right.
And ignore are you putting money in or taking money out or whatever? That's really the key at the end of the day, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I think that kind of high level analysis is probably the most important. And again, what's really neat about some of the tools that we have available is it kind of forces you to answer all of these questions of, how much do I have saved? How much do I actually need on a monthly basis? How much am I likely to get in retirement? When am I likely to start receiving that? Kind of forces you to kind of actually sit down and work through all the details there. Something to add there?
No, yeah, and that's why looking at your portfolio during retirement is super important too, because if you're needing it to last a certain amount of time, there is going to be some type of variable in regards to the return that you're getting. And I just thought I just wanted to point that out.
Right.
That we also need to be looking at that as well. You know what I mean?
I love that you brought that up, because the saving. So if you started early in your career and you just said, I'm going to put money away in a 401k and I'm not going to touch it, and I'm not even going to think about it, that was a great thing to have done, because now you've saved up a lot of money. The markets in your portfolio have probably done pretty well. The one caveat to that is on the portfolio allocation side of things, where you got to be careful underthinking that piece as you get close to retirement.
Right.
Probably 10 years out from retirement, maybe even 5. You don't need to worry or think about it too much. And if you look at a lot of the target date fund, glide path allocations, you kind of, it has this kind of S shape, right? And then where's my camera here? That's kind of S curve like that. And what's happened with these allocations is it's gone from like a nice even slope over time to now a lot of the allocations are like pretty much the same from like 20 years old all the way to 50.
Right.
And then at that point it starts to go, okay, now we're going to start getting pretty aggressive, or pretty conservative, I mean. And the reason for that is like, if we had like a really bad market situation, how long would it take for things to recover? And if that's like, let's say 5 to 10 years is like worst case, it takes maybe 5 years for a market to recover, like worst case scenario, maybe 10. And you're going to retire in 5 or 10 years. Like, okay, now a market correction really starts to matter in a way that it just didn't before.
Right.
So do you encounter a lot of people that didn't think too much about the savings piece and that helped them out, but
yes,
are also in a bad position potentially because they didn't think about the investments either?
Potentially, but luckily when they come in, then we're okay. Well, you are very close to retirement. Let's kind of shift your allocations to something more conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But it is crazy how many people come in and go, I just put money away. I really didn't know how much I had. I cannot believe how much I have. And those are so fun because those are like just good conversations to have.
Right.
But yeah, you definitely want to make sure though you're looking at those investments as you get closer and really throughout your retirement.
Right. Yeah. It's a tough balance, but I guess I'd rather be in the, just get in the habit of saving and not worry about it. But as you get closer, you've got to make a habit to review those investments on a regular basis. And really, even if you're young, you don't want to underthink the investments too, because what can happen is you have a far too conservative allocation, or just an allocation that doesn't make sense, and you end up having that for 20 years, and your money really doesn't work for you in the way that it should.
Yeah, I will say that some of those people that I met with, I mean, that sometimes is pure luck that they, happen to create a portfolio, probably choosing one of our asset allocation models or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if they didn't and they did choose their own and never went back to revisit it,
right,
that would put them in a tough situation because their portfolio is not built for different market climates, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's super good advice there. So, okay. Well, I think we've basically touched on all the kind of core elements here. One thing I'll add to this that kind of the article gets into is, when we've kind of talked very high level, kind of the theory, do you have enough money? What are you likely to spend and save? The one other piece that, when you're like really, like I'm retiring, not just in theory, not just a year or two from now, like I've got a date set, now you got to think through the mechanics of, I've got maybe several different accounts. Which accounts do I withdraw from? And then how am I invested across those accounts, and what types of investments do I have where? Am I 59 and a half and I can, withdraw from everything penalty free, or do I have to find some other way to have access to funds? When am I taking Social Security? So the article talks a little bit about what we call a distribution schedule, which is to say, working through the actual game plan of first this account, then that account, these investments go here, these go there. So really thinking through the mechanics of all of that. That's where things can get, depending on how much money you have saved up and in what types of accounts and how many accounts you have, it can get pretty complicated pretty quick. And some people are in a position where they've just saved pre-tax into a 401k, they retire, they've just got a single IRA, and they've got a pretty easy situation. Right. But often when we're working with retirees, they might have 4, 5, 6 accounts. You've got to coordinate between all of them, and then you've got choices for what accounts to withdraw from and when. Maybe the last question for you, Michaela. I see Social Security on here. When should somebody take from Social Security? How does that factor into my distribution schedule? Yeah,
that's a really tough question. You can get Social Security as early as 62, as late as 70. To get your full benefit of Social Security, that's going to be age 67 currently. And so if you do receive Social Security before 67, you're going to get a reduced amount, right? And so the question is, when should I take out Social Security? Well, if your goal is to get the most from Social Security, usually you want to take it out later. However, I do think that there is a personal value question that you have to ask yourself. Is it more important to get as much as you can from Social Security? Which, Zach, I think you might tend to lean that way. Or, do you just need X amount from this benefit to allow you to retire now? And if it gives you the retirement standard of living that you're comfortable with, then I don't think that's a bad decision either. So I think you have to look at your own situation and make that determination. Doing something like that income needs analysis would be helpful. And then always talking to the Social Security Administration directly about what benefits are offered to you is super important. But I do think it is a personal decision. I don't, it's going to come down to what's important to you. Which I'm on the off. I'm like, retire when you can. But...
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely the right way to think about it. It's like what do the numbers tell you? Mm-hmm. And you'll get a clear answer there. The numbers say, because we make this assumption that you're going to live till 95, 100.
Right.
Some people hate that assumption.
Yes, they do. A lot of doctors do.
But, we make that assumption. And if you make that assumption, you want to wait till 70.
Right.
So that's what the numbers say. But I think what you're getting at is, it's not always about the numbers.
That's right.
There's kind of a more, there's the comfort sometimes with, taking Social Security earlier and, not having that, kind of like maybe paying off a loan earlier or something like that.
Right.
Maybe the math doesn't mean that you should do that, depending on the interest rate, but it probably feels good to go ahead and get that taken care of. And
absolutely.
So I think sometimes with Social Security, retirees can kind of think about it like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, this was a fun episode. Covered a lot of different stuff. Yeah, I got very fired up about all of the war and the oil situation and fixed income and everything like that. But this was a fun episode. We went through, covered just a wide range of topics. But appreciate your insights,
thank you,
Michaela, from the RetireAdvisers side of the world. And of course, if any of you have questions or would like to connect with anybody from our teams, please reach out and let us know. RetireAdvisers.com. You can schedule a meeting there and check out our articles and resources.